Hello everybody and welcome back to another video today. I am going to be going over the final week of the June Joust qualifiers, the matches from Thursday, Friday, and Saturday of this past weekend. I will be putting out a second video tomorrow where I talk about the matches from Sunday. I want to make sure I give those matches their fair share, give them the time that they deserve because it was a huge day and there are a lot of things that I really want to talk about with those matches, so I want to give them their own dedicated video. So for today, we're just going to talk about the matches that we saw taking place, the online matches in North America and the matches from the Hangzhou homestand over in the APAC region. Real quickly, to throw out my picks from this past week. It was a 12-2 week for me. Pretty good, if I do say so myself. 2-0 in the big picks, so not as good as that undefeated streak I had going at the beginning of the year, but you know, we would have seen that going for eventually. So let's jump in and let's talk about the North America matches first, and then we will move on to Hangzhou after the fact and talk about the APAC games. So on Thursday, we had the Paris Eternal with a big win over the Boston Uprising. The Uprising, of course, were an undefeated team at the time going into this match. The Eternal were 1-1. They were looking pretty good after a good win over the Washington Justice the first weekend, and then they had a bit of a break, and they came back here, and they looked really good against the Uprising. I think the Eternal are a really good team. Obviously, they exceeded my expectations for this one, even with a new main tank or off-tank player in Vestola coming in to replace Ellie Vogt, who has left the team due to injury. They still looked really good. I think Naga has looked very good on the Echo. He is one of the best in the league at that hero. I think Onigod's playing really well. I think the whole team looks really good. I think Dredro brought a ton of new life and energy into this team. They are definitely, for me, one of the most improved teams from the May Melee to the June Joust. They look so much better. And to me, they have crept well far out of that kind of bottom level of NA teams. They are firmly, to me, kind of that middle of the pack area. They are a threat to any team on any day. They shouldn't be favored, I think, in a lot of matches against your top level teams, but they can beat anybody on any given day. So really good Uprising Eternal match here, and especially good if you are an Eternal fan. Moving on to the Thursday primetime game, the Dallas Fuel taking on the Florida Mayhem. That was my first big pick game of the week. Dallas Fuel ended up walking away with that one 3-2. Mayhem not looking as good this tournament cycle as they did last time around. This doesn't really surprise me. They have a pretty hard schedule, all things considered. I mean, they had to play, obviously, Fuel and the Justice this week, which we'll get to that one. They also had to play the Houston Outlaws. So they had to play some good teams this tournament cycle. Dallas Fuel still looking good. Definitely some concerns, some questions about whether or not they can run everything. And whether or not they long-term will be able to continue finding success if the meta moves away from those Winston compositions. But as long as they can run Winston and they can run Winston viably, they will be able to find success. And that's really just the meat and potatoes for the Dallas Fuel. That's the type of team they are. That's all they need, is they just need to be able to run Winston and they can win. Fearless has had that much of an impact. Winston is just the best in the league. And obviously, with the way this composition has been working in this meta in NA specifically, where you have these Neo-Goats compositions, Dupli-Goats, whatever you want to call it, where you have the Moira Lucio with the Echo and the Winston and the Diva, and then usually with like a Reaper, or McCree sometimes, but usually like a Reaper. The way that Fielder is able to build these coalescences on Moira is just, he has such a high impact every single fight. And, I mean, it's just incredible watching this team play. They know how this composition works. They know how this meta works. They're always going to be a dangerous team. I think it's something that I doubted, their ability to be really good in numerous metas. But as it is right now, I have very few doubts about this Dallas Fuel roster. So, good win for them. Great weekend for them, but we'll talk more about that as we get further along in this video and going into tomorrow's video. On Friday, we saw the LA Gladiators take on the Boston Uprising. Obviously, the Uprising had already lost, so their chance of an undefeated June Joust qualifiers is already spoiled, but the Gladiators still had a shot, and they finally get the dub to keep themselves looking very good. The Gladiators had a rough week, the first week of the season, but they've been really good since. I think a lot of people have slept on them, have doubted them, have looked at them as kind of a weak team, but the Gladiators are a legit team. They're a real threat. They can really challenge pretty much any top-level team in the league right now. I think that they are a legit contender, and I think that they should be considered one. Uprising have had their moments, but they still have a ways to go. But the fact that they had a month as good as they did is definitely a step in the right direction for them and a sign of good things to come. The Shock took on the Titans. It was not a speed run like people thought it would be. The Shock, as you may expect, they did a little trolling. Not much to learn from this one. Titans had a couple good maps. I think it was Hanamura where they looked pretty good. They were able to hold the Shock from fully capping point B, but they weren't able to cap point A themselves, and so they had some moments as though the best they've looked so far in the June Joust, but it was still a pretty one-sided affair in favor of the Shock. The Washington Justice taking on the Florida Mayhem. A win for the Washington Justice was a good win for them. Very much improved. Very impressed by the way the Justice played. They looked like a completely different team from the team that we saw in Week 1 of this June Joust, where they looked lost. They didn't look like they had it all together. Justice are a legit, serious contender right now. I think there's an argument to be made that they are a top 4 team in NA right now, top 3 team potentially. The way that they dismantled this Mayhem roster was really good. The aggression that was kind of an issue before, where they were very passive and slow, and they took too much time to kind of move and kind of make any type of push, not really much of an issue anymore. They put Decay in, and Decay just did Decay things, as you would expect from Decay. So, huge series for the Justice, getting that big win against a team who beat them back in the May Melee knockout games. So, love to see the Justice making some big moves, improving a lot, and I'm really hoping that this is the start of the climb back up towards the top for the Justice. Moving on to Saturday for the NA matches. LA Gladiators beating the Paris Eternal. LA Gladiators, with this win, I believe, have become the 4th team in Overwatch League history to beat all 19 other teams in the league. We'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later with a different team, but a team that did it technically before the Gladiators were able to, earlier this week. So good win for the Gladiators. The Eternal pushed them. They took a map off of them. The Eternal have looked good, like I said, with the Uprising series. I want to give a huge shout out to Avala. I tweeted about this the other day. Avala put this roster together. She put so much time and effort into making this roster, and she's done a fantastic job. When you have a roster like the London Spitfire roster, which is just a British Hurricane roster thrown together, added Shax, added Blase, added Hybrid, right? Like, other than that, though, it's basically just the same team that was the British Hurricane. Now we are looking at a really good team that has come together by throwing a bunch of contenders players from EU contenders and making this roster. And it's been really good, really successful. Naga's been great, and it's been fantastic to see this team play. Pushing a very good Gladiators team on some of the maps, taking a map off of them. Very impressive. I've been very impressed by the Eternal so far this season. Gladiators, though, give them a ton of credit for the fact that they've improved greatly from that first weekend that we saw them, where they lost to, granted, 2 very good teams in the Shock and the Fuel. So they win against really good teams, they win against teams that they probably should beat. They've struggled against some good teams, and so I definitely want to see some more from the Gladiators going forward, but I have been impressed with them so far, so good win for them. Dallas Fuel took on the Vancouver Titans. Once again, not really much of a match to talk about here. Titans don't look very good, and the Dallas Fuel do, so they won that match as you would expect them to. Not much to take away from this one. The Fuel did not want to take this one easy. They went all in on stopping the Titans. Final NA match of the weekend, well, of this portion of the weekend, was the San Francisco Shock 3-2 victory over the Washington Justice. This, to me, was the Justice's best match of the weekend. And despite the fact that they couldn't close it out and they couldn't get the win against a really good Shock team, this, to me, was the proof that they are a legit team, right? They need to get better, obviously. They need to be able to close out a series like this one. They had the 2-1 lead going into map 4, and they just could not pull it out on the last 2 maps and end up falling to the Shock. But if there's any question of whether or not the Justice could recover from a bad opening weekend, that match to me was the one that just put any of those fears aside. I think that for the most part, Decay had a better series than Striker, and I think that for the most part, it was a very good and close and very evenly matched series. I think Mag has done incredibly so far this season, definitely still in the Rookie of the Year contention. He's not my favorite right now for the award, but he's definitely still up there, top 2, top 3 for sure in that category. Really solid player, and I think that this is a really great match just to kind of look back at and see just how good these two teams are and how close the Justice are to being considered one of those dominant top-level teams in the Overwatch League. But let's move on over to the APAC matches where we had the Hangzhou Spark homestand. It was so nice seeing all of the fans at matches, getting to hear crowd noise again, getting to see walkouts again, getting to see like live player reactions when there's actually people in the crowd. It's just so much different. The way they react is just so much better. And it was such a great thing to watch. I loved it so much. It was so entertaining and so fun to see. And so, honestly, huge shout out to the Hangzhou Spark for putting on what looked like a fantastic event. And of course, shout out to Roy, the Chinese caster, and his girlfriend, whose name I don't remember at the moment. I think it was Xiao Xiao. Shout out to the two of them, because that was incredible. And I'm so happy that they got engaged. That was lovely and great, and I'm very happy for them. But let's talk about the matches that we actually saw take place this past weekend in the APAC region. The first one was the Philadelphia Fusion beating the Guangzhou Charge. Good win for them. Obviously, just like the Washington Justice, they had a very tough week in the first week of these qualifiers. They come out and they get a 3-0 victory over the Charge, which was a big win. The fact that they beat the Charge 3-0 was huge, because that put them in position to go up against the Valiant, and as long as they could sweep the Valiant, they were pretty much guaranteed, well, not pretty much guaranteed, they would beat out New York for a spot in the June Joust, and so it was a huge win for them being able to take a win over the Charge without dropping a map. And in addition to that, this was also the Philadelphia Fusion's first ever win over the Guangzhou Charge, and the Guangzhou Charge, to my knowledge, were the only team in the Overwatch League that the Fusion had yet to defeat, which means that the Philadelphia Fusion were the third team ever to defeat all 19 teams in the Overwatch League, other than themselves, of course. For those of you who are wondering, the other two teams who have done it are the San Francisco Shock and the LA Valiant. And then, of course, now we have the Fusion and the LA Gladiators joining that club. NYXL are 1 win away, but it's against the Vancouver Titans. Probably won't see that for a while. And I believe the other one is the Titans, who are very close. They've never beaten the Justice. It's the only team they've never beaten. So that one could happen potentially this season, but probably not. So good win for the Fusion. EQO finally gets to rejoin this team, and he looked very good on the Echo. The fact that he played every map they played this weekend is a huge sign of faith in him as a player, and I think there was any kind of concern about whether or not this team was truly committed to their Western players. The fact that EQO played every single map dispelled any fears from me. So big win for the Fusion, putting themselves in great position to potentially qualify for that June Joust tournament. Next, the Seoul Dynasty taking on the Chengdu Hunters. I think this one ended up being a 3-1, maybe a 3-0. Seoul was pretty dominant in this series. They played much better than the Hunters did. Wasn't too close. Dynasty, I think, have looked decent. I definitely have some concerns about them. I'm a little skeptical about the nature of their play. And I mean, they did some weird stuff in week 2, running a lot of like Roadhog compositions, but they opted not to run those this week. They went just to the Orisa double shield compositions. So we'll see. I think Fitz and Profit have looked really good, or Profits, that DPS duo has been really good. And I think that it's been a good season so far for them, but I have some concerns just because they have not been able to get over the hump. Like, they've struggled against Shanghai this season. They've beaten some other teams that you consider decent. Like, they beat Chengdu, obviously in this match, who they've lost to in the May Melee qualifiers, or May Melee knockout matches last time around. But like, they've been unable to get over that Shanghai Dragons hurdle so far this season. In their 2 matches, I believe they have played prior to this weekend. Maybe it was only 1. But regardless, they've struggled against some teams, and it's definitely a bit of a concern for the Dynasty. But I think they've looked pretty good, and so I would say that they have a pretty good grasp on where to go. They just are not quite looking like an elite level team yet. But a win over the Hunters, definitely a big win for them. So good for them, happy for them, and I'm glad to see the Seoul Dynasty make it a name for themselves. And then on Friday, final match was the LA Valiant taking on the Hangzhou Spark. 2 teams playing in person for the first time since March of 2020. 2 teams on stage together. It was so great to watch. The Hangzhou Spark dominated the Valiant, which is not much of a surprise. The Spark were looking like the best team potentially in Asia going into the June Joust, so you kind of expected that to be the result. But what a great showing from the Spark. What a huge weekend for them. Just getting to play in front of their home crowd and getting to watch their walkouts was so fun and so exciting. And so love to see the success of homestand events. Glad to see them back. Glad to see so many fans in attendance, especially for Saturday and Sunday. But Saturday especially had a lot of people in attendance. And it was a really great thing to watch. So I'm a big fan of what we've seen from the Spark so far. I think they have a great grasp on the meta. Their way of playing Winston was pretty strong. I'm curious to see what they will do in the Summer Showdown. I don't know what the meta is going to look like. Obviously, there's no hero pools, so we might return back to kind of what we saw in the May Melee, maybe with Echo still being a bit more of a mainstay than Tracer, but some teams may just opt to go for the Tracer depending on the team. But I thought the Spark looked very good against the Valiant, as you would expect, so good win for them. Moving to Saturday, we had the LA Valiant take on the Philadelphia Fusion. As I mentioned before, Fusion just had to win 3-0 against the Valiant. The Valiant, who had not won a map since the first match of the season. So it seemed like a pretty easy task for the Philadelphia Fusion, and they could not accomplish that. And the Fusion did win the series, but they won the series in a 3-1 fashion, which ultimately led to them having the same differential from the qualifiers as the New York Excelsior. And of course, the NYXL beat the Philadelphia Fusion back in week 1 of the June Joust qualifiers, or I guess that was week 6, if you want to be more specific. And so, with that map loss of the Valiant, the Fusion pretty much eliminated themselves from the June Joust. It wasn't guaranteed. If the Charge could beat the Dynasty and the Spark still won, there was a shot for the Fusion to get in, but it was looking very unlikely that the Fusion would find a way in as a result of that map loss of the Valiant. So they did not put the pressure on as much as they needed to, and it really did end up costing them in the end. Because as we move on to the Dynasty versus the Charge, the Dynasty did in fact beat the Charge. The Dynasty's differential was not fantastic. I think this was a 3-0 or a 3-1. It was not too close to a series, but the Dynasty didn't have a great differential. So if they had lost this series and ended up 2-2, they would have had a worse differential than both Philadelphia and New York, no matter what the scoreline was, because the Dynasty were, at the time, 2-1 plus 1, and the Fusion and NYXL finished at 2-2 plus 1. So the fact that the Fusion lost a map to the Valiant ended up costing them big time, because the Dynasty then finished top 3. Basically, at that point in time, it became impossible for the Fusion to make it. And then for the NYXL, it just came down to what would happen in the last series of the weekend, which was the Chengdu Hunters against the Hangzhou Spark. Chengdu Hunters, if they had won 3-0, would have taken that 4th seed in the Summer Showdown, or the June Joust. And ultimately, it was unable to happen. The Hangzhou Spark win the series 3-2. It was my final big pick of the weekend. And this was a great series. It was really close. It was back and forth. And it was in front of a home crowd. And it was both teams having tons of fans, right? Chengdu Hunters have a ton of fans in China. It's the only roster of all Chinese players, and so a lot of fans in China rooting for this team. Hangzhou Spark, of course, was their home event, so a lot of home fans there as well. So it was great having a match where you would have something happen and you'd hear the crowds cheering, but you'd hear it for both sides, right? Chengdu makes a big play, you'd hear one side of the crowd cheer. Hangzhou makes a big play, you'd hear the other side of the crowd cheer. It was so back and forth. It was so exciting. It was so exhilarating. And it's why I cannot wait for homestands to come back in the North American region. We did see Hastro saying that there is possibility that Dallas Fuel events are coming. I can't even say it's possible. Like he said, there's going to be details coming in this upcoming week. So I suppose we'll see more about that. But this is a great matchup. I really enjoyed this one. Hangzhou Spark, I think, are one of the teams that I really, really enjoy watching. I think Gushui's play has been incredible this season. And Shai is just unbelievably talented. And he is right now my Rookie of the Year favorite. He's looked very good all season. Ever since they started playing him, the team has looked a lot better. And so really, really, really good performances out of him. He's looked great. He's looked incredible. So the Spark have looked really good. And I think that they have really found a composition that works for them whenever they can run those Winston compositions. They don't look as great when they run Orisa. Reinhardt's fine, but really it's those Winston compositions that they love to play. Gushui's Winston is one of my favorites to watch. He and Fearless are probably my two favorite Winstons in the league, just because their mechanics on Winston are so clean and so crisp, and they know the hero better than any other players in the league, arguably. Yeah, Gesture's got a good Winston. Yeah, Mono's got a good Winston, but Gushui, his Winston is unlike any other. It's just so good. He and Fearless are like on their own level. It's wild to watch. So all those matches concluding, we of course ended up finding out who would be playing in the June Joust. In the APAC region, it would be the number 1 seeded Hangzhou Spark taking on the number 4 seeded NYXL, and then the number 2 seeded Shanghai Dragons taking on the number 3 seeded Seoul Dynasty. While in North America, the Gladiators locked up the 1 seed, the Shock locked up the number 2 seed, and then the 3 seed Atlanta Reign would take on the 6 seeded Boston Uprising, while the 4 seeded Houston Outlaws would take on the 5 seeded Dallas Fuel. But I will talk more about that next time tomorrow, so be on the lookout for that when it drops tomorrow. So want to be able to talk about those matches, give them the time they deserve and the appropriate amount of analysis and just breaking down, because they were some great matches. There were some really interesting matches, some great storylines developing from what we saw. So cannot wait to talk about that tomorrow. But that is all for me today. If you enjoyed this video and want more like it in the future, consider liking and subscribing. And, of course, comment down below your thoughts on what happened this past weekend. I thought it was a great weekend, but I'd love to hear from you and what you thought about it. That's all from me for today, so thank you once again. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.